It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sonia Kelly. If you're listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video, and I'll be sure to point those out as we go along if you want to head over there after listening on just audio. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsor of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, which is Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit their website at ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Now let's jump into the show. Our topic today is financial strategies for women's inclusion in the midst of climate change. This is a topic that's become even more important to me in the last few months because our team has calculated that 753 million women in climate vulnerable countries do not have an active bank account or e-wallet. Our president and CEO, Mary Ellen Iskandarian, wrote this book called There's Nothing Micro About a Billion Women. And this means that 3/4 of women who are financially excluded live in a climate vulnerable geography. The climate crisis is actually a women's financial inclusion challenge. Now, Women's World Banking has crunched a few more numbers, a few more figures that I want to share with you today. We discovered that 880 million women in climate vulnerable geographies would not have a way to receive emergency support payments after a severe weather event. This means when you hear about like floods or droughts, things that actually keep infrastructure from being able to reach people. There's not a way to get payments to women, to these 880 million women. As well, 840 million women in climate vulnerable countries would find it difficult or impossible to cover the cost of an emergency. So they really need that financial support in some way, or credit, or payments, or insurance. Now, the timing of our conversation today is prescient because next week in New York, global leaders are gathering for Climate Week on the heels of the UN General Assembly meetings. And rather than focusing on what's happening in New York with global leaders, I want to focus on a low-income woman in an emerging market. Women's World Banking talked recently with Esther. Esther is a 45-year-old fisherwoman in Ambon Bay in Indonesia. And she faces significant financial challenges that are exacerbated by climate change. In her region, there are rising temperatures, there are unpredictable weather patterns, and all of these things disrupt her fishing activities and her market sales, which reduces her income. Now, in Indonesia, temperatures are expected to continue to rise, and Indonesia is on that list of climate vulnerable countries that I just mentioned. And without proper storage facilities, Esther needs to sell her fish quickly to avoid spoilage. And it's often at a loss, actually. So Esther's daily profit generally is Indonesian rupiah 100,000, and that is $6.51. And this profit is carefully allocated to her household expenses, to her savings, and to repaying microloans that are essential for her family's needs. Now, her entire community of women fishers shares these same struggles. She's not unique. And many are forced into debt just to cover basic needs. And to adapt, these fisherwomen urgently need resources like capital to make infrastructure investments in their businesses, creating better cooling storage facilities for their product. They need support in securing reliable supplies. They also need access to tailored financial services like flexible loans and flexible repayment, like insurance products to protect against climate related losses, digital payment platforms, which could help them and their community manage their finances more effectively and receive payments from their customers. Now, women like Esther need finance to adapt their businesses to our new global reality, which includes extreme heat. And you're going to hear about that from our guest today. There are other women who have experienced a debilitating climate shock, like a flood or like a drought, and they need finance like insurance for their resilience. Finally, women need access to the capital that's necessary for them to be able to participate in the growing green economy. Women have the power to choose lower emitting technology and equipment for their daily tasks. They just need the resources to be able to do so. Now, I'm more and more convinced that gender equality is the most urgent climate issue of all. Women with access to financial services are better equipped to deal with the shocks related to climate risks and to build their own resilience. And just a personal note before I introduce our guest today, sometimes talking about climate change can be discouraging. It can be discouraging to me. I'm reading a book right now called Not the End of the World. It's by Hannah Ritchie. And it gives reminders of all of the big wins that we've had as a community, as a global development community. I remember growing up, for example, in the 1980s, we were talking a lot about the ozone layer and concerns about the ozone layer. And that's not a concern anymore. That's actually a challenge that we've fixed. So let's keep in mind that women's resilience to climate shocks, women's adaptation to climate realities, and women's participation in climate mitigation are all achievable goals. So for those of you who are tempted to switch over to your music app, you're worried about like a bit of a downer over the next 30 minutes, please hold on because our conversation is going to highlight the solutions and achievable objectives that we can pursue as a community. The book that I've been reading, this book, Not the End of the World, says we need more urgent optimism. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guest. Kathy Boffman McLeod is the Chief Executive Officer of Climate Resilience for All. She has an impressive track record in executive leadership, and her leadership spans the public, nonprofit, and private sectors with key roles at the Arch Rockefeller Resilience Center, at Bank of America, and at the Nature Conservancy. Her expertise encompasses global climate resilience policy, risk and adaptation financing, and nature-based climate solutions. She's been named by Reuters as one of the 20 Trailblazing Women in Climate for 2024. Kathy's also a member of FEMA's National Advisory Council, and she has an MBA from Duke and a master's in geography. She's a leading voice on combating extreme heat and building resilient communities worldwide. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. Can I start just by asking, what is your origin story? Like, your background is so interesting, have both like the environmental aspect and the financial side. What brought you to the space of economics and climate change?
I started in conservation. I have a master's in geography, and the world was facing loss of biodiversity and natural open space as development was gobbling up things that are recharging our aquifers, and as we saw urban areas beginning to be disassociated from nature. And so I started my career working to keep urban communities, particularly low income communities, with access to nature and green spaces in an effort to keep us connected to our environment and to our habitat, but also to want to protect it in the future. And so I migrated from conservation to climate, and climate to the finances and risk around climate change. I worked for the elected chief financial officer of the state of Florida. So big risk, big climate related physical risks in a coastal state of 17,000 miles of coastal area and all of the things that come with that, plus the politics of insurance and thinking about the price of insurance for people who live in high climate risk areas. And then came to the Nature Conservancy and focused on using insurance as a financing strategy for climate adaptation, insurance and nature together. And we built um, an insurance policy first ever on a coral reef in Mexico based on its protective value of the economy, the tourism economy, which was $10 billion annually around Quintana Roo and in Cancun and down to Tulum. And then found my way into Bank of America. And this could be a long story. We only have half an hour, but just to show it's all interconnected. I mean, this is it. It's all interconnected. And came to a place after 5 years at the Arstrock Resilience Center that women are the answer to the climate
Mm.
question, and that the disproportionate impact of extreme heat and the duality of the disproportionate um, strength and nature of women to solve these kinds of challenges in communities and at the global level too, that was where I wanted to focus my attention. After quantifying that economic impact to women, we particularly did a study with Vivid Economics around the um, labor markets and informal labor, but also paid and unpaid and care work in Nigeria, India, and the US. And the results were so gobsmacking of how disproportionate the burden was and how pushed further into poverty, but also away from growth and opportunity and choice and agency women were becoming, that it was very clear. I I left and started this new organization with 5 colleagues, and we focus specifically on addressing health and livelihoods of women in vulnerable communities facing extreme heat.
I have like 10 follow-up questions. First, you said that you have crunched the numbers behind the size of the proportionate version. Sorry, you've crunched the numbers around the size of the disproportionate burden that women carry. Can you give us some of those numbers, like a sense for that, the volume of challenge that women are facing?
Well, I can start by saying that women are 4 times more heat intolerant than men. So we start with a physiological um, disproportionate impact. So it's physical. It's our hormones, especially during pregnancy, but just regular everyday, 4 times more heat intolerant. Women-led households have an additional 10% loss from extreme heat versus a male-led household.
Mm.
Um, Heat is leading to more gender-based violence. You know, when you're hot, you're angry, you're cranky, it shows up in the way that femicide and gender based violence are always higher, and emergency room visits and calls to emergency lines for help are higher during heat. Um, Women are burdened by the fact that they have to care for everyone else. And so we found them out of the paid economy more. They themselves felt sick. They're disproportionately not feeling great and slow and in pain. And they're helping care for everyone else who is slow and not feeling good in their
Mm.
families, seniors, children, spouses. Um, and so more time out of the paid economy. And so it was, we found cultural. We know that our partners in Pakistan, the women have to sleep inside, and the men and the boys can sleep on the porch where there's a breeze.
Mm.
That's for cultural and religious reasons. Our partners in India, the men can work the night shift when it's cooler because the shifts have been pushed to the night because it's not safe to work during that time. Women are home with their kids, taking care of their kids and putting them to bed, giving them dinner. They're missing a whole shift. That's missing money. That's missing opportunity and choice. And so, I mean, I could go on. I could go on and on. The ways that women are disproportionately impacted: cultural, financial, and physiological.
Mm. And so you mentioned this intersection between climate, finance, and gender. Let's talk about the finance piece for a second. How important is finance in addressing climate challenges? Like, is it a nice to have or is it an absolute need to have?
Oh, finance is essential. I mean, money is the currency we use for power. And so women need power, choice, agency. And when you see those increases in income and in financial resources, the shift of the power balance between husbands and wives and in families shifts. And in a lot of work I did at the Nature Conservancy around um, in Papua New Guinea around mangrove conservation and restoration, and a group of women who were in a livelihoods fund, and their status in the community and within their families rose when they have more money. I mean, it's a natural thing. And so, as I say, we have to address gender inequality. Part of inequality is financial inequality, economic inequality. You have to have access to make money and have money and make decisions over your own money. And that is what gives you the power and agency to sit and make decisions about the policy and the economic pathways toward solving climate change. So they're hand in hand, and we have to have both.
I'm so glad you see the connection between those two things because Women's World Banking sees, and this is reflected in World Bank data, pervasive 7 percentage point gender gap between men's access to accounts and women's access to accounts, which we use as a proxy for looking at financial inequity. And actually, in Nigeria, we've calculated it's going to take over 100 years to see parity in women's and men's access to financial services. And so these things just compound climate realities for people in this kind of new equilibrium that we're living in.
And Sonia, I agree 100%. And I also want to add that when women do well, everyone does well. So this is not
Mm,
an exclusive strategy to focus on women. This is, our motto at Climate Resilience for All is when women are climate resilient, we will all be climate resilient. I mean,
mm,
women are the backbone of communities. Women on boards are bringing 20% more return for companies. Women heads of state have fewer carbon emissions. They have had fewer deaths from COVID. They sign more treaties. They invest more in early childhood education. So we know, and women manage risk. I mean, we're women in terms of even just credit risk, just there. So this is not a strategy just for women. This is a strategy for everybody.
I love that. When women are climate resilient, we will all be climate resilient. Let's talk about adaptation for a minute. Adaptation, as I mentioned in the intro, is the ways that we change our lives and our businesses given climate realities. So it might be cooling solutions, it might be water solutions. And the World Economic Forum estimates the adaptation market could be worth 2 trillion US dollars per year by 2026. So, can you talk a little bit about that given extreme heat and your work on extreme heat? Like, what adaptations do women's businesses need given rising temperatures?
The most important thing in terms of extreme heat, and one of the best things, I mean, you said this is not going to be, stay tuned because it's not a sad podcast about how terrible all climate impacts are. I mean, they are terrible, and we can tell you what they are, but there are so many solutions specifically for extreme heat, and no one has to die from extreme heat. I mean, every life
Mm,
lost is avoidable. We need to know about it. We need to know what to do about it. And then we have to have the capacity to do it. And then nobody dies, nobody gets sick. And that means a lot. I mean, it's of course easier said than done, but awareness is the number one thing. Actionable guidance. Do I understand the signs of heat? Can I tell that my body is breaking down? Can I tell that this is happening for my kids, or
mm,
do I recognize it? And then do I know what to do about it? The other thing is taking care of workers. So important. Do the employees you have, are they protected from heat? Are you taking breaks? Are you following the very best protocols to protect them? And particularly if we're talking about women in the informal sector, there
mm,
are no legal protections. Informal means informal. They're not protected by laws and labor laws and things like that. I mean, things are improving in places, and there are advocates around informal workers, men and women, and unions like the Self Employed Women's Association. But in terms of your business, thinking through what are my specific heat risks? me as a person and
Mm.
my body, do I have underlying health conditions I should think about in terms of the interplay with extreme heat? Do my employees, do I recognize the signs? Do the people that work for me, do they recognize the signs of the people they supervise? And then thinking about managing supply chain around these small businesses. And you mentioned this in your story in the opening that we know that members of the Self-Employed Women's Association, when they know that it's going to be really hot, they buy fewer fruits and vegetables because they don't have the cold chain or
Mm.
the cooling storage that they need. And so information is number one. How hot is it going to be? How long is it going to last? And so that gets into an inequality of information. And so we found that 72% of men in India have access to a smartphone or to a phone. And that number is more like 52%, something much lower for women.
Mm.
And so that's another point of our work is how do we reach people with the information they need to be able to manage their money? I mean, it's an economic um, imperative to know that it's going to be this hot. In one of our stories, one of the SEVA members got her, and I know we're going to talk about this, but got part of the insurance payout and bought seed because she knew that the price gougers were going to jump and raise the price. And
Mm.
so that was another economic decision made based on information and a little bit of income support from our program. So lots of things that women business owners and heads of family can do to reduce the risks of extreme heat, and knowledge is at the top of that list.
Yeah, and you mentioned mobile phone access, which is, we're talking about gender, we're talking about finance. There are so many other enabling factors here. And GSMA, you mentioned the stats from GSMA on mobile phone uptake and usage and internet access in India. We just at Women's World Banking, we just published something on Matt's Granyard, who you probably know at GSMA, in celebration of our 45-year anniversary because of the big role that GSMA and that data has played in allowing us to create the right solutions for the right time. And so I want to come back to that solution because we both talked about how solvable these challenges are. So tell me about what the solution is here. Tell me about this Sewa
Oh,
project
I
that you
will.
worked on. Yeah.
I will say though, there's one thing that I feel like I always have to say is that, we say there's so many solutions for heat. The number one solution is to stop burning fossil fuels and to
Mm,
stop digging the hole we're in. So I want
mm,
to acknowledge the role of mitigation in this. And what is, I mean, unfortunate, it's kind of an understatement, but unfortunate is we're not able to do that. We know just what to do. We know how to do it. We have the technology to do it. We have the capital to do it. We're not doing it. And so
mm,
thus we jump in, with both feet into adaptation. We want to save lives and protect health and our economy and our infrastructure. And so I just want to say for listeners, the number one solution is stop digging the hole that's making the earth hotter.
mm,
Now, having said that, back over to the solutions. Um, so you told a story of a fisher in Indonesia, which is quite similar to a story I want to tell you about a head loader in the market of Ahmedabad. She's a member of the Self-Employed Women's Association. It's a labor union of 2.9 million women. I know they're a longtime partner, and their founder, Ilabat, was a founding board member of Women's World Banking, so lots of
mhm,
connections. And Gita Ben is moving fabric and other things, but today, on this day of the story, fabric from one end of the market to the other. And on March 26th, it was 40 45 degrees C, which is like 107 or
Oh,
108.
oh my.
It was 51 in Delhi. So,
Mm,
what does that make it? 113, 14, something like that in Fahrenheit. And so, because of her low social status, she's not able to wait inside the shops. So, she has a
mm,
client at one end of the market. She picks up the fabric and she's taking it to another end of the market where it will be used to make things. And that shop said, she can't wait inside. So, she's been out in the heat all day. And one of the factors when you don't have access to a safe public toilet is that people have to go outside. And
mhm,
women, it feels unsafe. It doesn't feel dignified. They don't want to do that. So they restrict the amount of water that they drink. So if you restrict the amount of water you drink and you're in 44 degrees temperatures, you're going to get dehydrated. And many of the SEVA members and the other 700 million in um, in the heat working in the informal economy get urinary tract infections, and
Oh,
they
wow.
have a rash on their skin that used to be 4 months out of the year, and now, given temperatures every single day, they have a rash.
Mm,
They are reporting miscarriages. They have blisters, dizziness. So the health effects, which very quickly equal economic and financial effects, are profound. And so Gita Ben is waiting on the curb on this very hot day. She puts the fabric on her head, and she sets off and blacks out from the heat. She just
mm,
passes out. She hits her head, so she's a minor head injury. She breaks her leg, and she has to go to the hospital. She doesn't have the money to pay for the hospital, so they charge her for, and she goes to the private hospital. The public hospital was either not accessible or too crowded. I don't remember why, but it was not an option for her. So she had to take a loan for the cast and the IV, and the interest is substantial. So then she's also responsible for 50% of the value of what she carries. It's just part of
mm,
the contract with the client. So if she soils that product, she has to pay back half of the value. So it's soiled because it fell, got dirty. So she's got to take a loan to pay that half too. So she can't work for 3 weeks. So she's now in debt to, in two different places and doesn't have enough for food. So let me put a pin in this story and jump to our solution. So Climate Resilience for All partnered with the Self Employed Women's Association to provide access to a micro insurance called a parametric that pays out when a certain temperature is hit. And
mm,
we know that heat means your body breaks down and people die from heat. And we have seen it's killing more people than any other climate hazard. And it's invisible and silent. And so, knowing that this heat is going to affect her ability to make her, on average, $3 a day, not unlike your fisher in Indonesia. And that number is going down because of heat and flood. So
mm,
climate change is pushing members of the Self-Employed Women's Association and women everywhere further into poverty. And so she is participating in the Women's Climate Shock Insurance and Livelihoods Initiative program. It's very catchy, we call it WCS for short.
mhm.
And 50,000 women of SEVA participated. And
Wow.
we added, and they're from all different trades. So we had the head loaders like Gita. We also had construction workers, ship breakers, women breaking up ships for recycling, waste recyclers, home based workers, farmers, street vendors, and the most heat exposed trades. And so we offered the insurance. We also offered a layer of cash. So it's a social support. When the temperature hit 40, they were all eligible in their districts. So we were in 3 states and 23 districts. They're all eligible for a payout of about $5 US. It's a day and a half of income. And then when it hit plus or minus 43, depending on the weather basin you're in, there are different, types of um, climates, coastal, desert, et cetera, urban, you are eligible for each day that trigger hits $3 to replace your income. And so, 100% of the women in the program were paid the $5, and 92% of the women were paid between $7.50 and $19.85.
Mm,
And so the stories that we heard about what that money meant and what they did with that money, Geeta Ben was able to pay her debts and
mm,
eat for 10 days with the money that she received. She had a little bit of debt left to the client for the fabric, but that's a longstanding client, and that was the best. That was the best scenario in her opinion about how to. If she had some debt left, that was the better, lower interest for her to do. Um, and so she was able to go back to work in 3 weeks, and she did not go back to work further in debt, diminished because she didn't have enough to eat. And so this is one of the stories of the Women's Climate Shock Insurance and um, Livelihoods Initiative. There are also stories about women having their dignity restored, and the way they felt their self-respect was reinstated after being able to pay off a debt of her husband, who told her she had to work off the debt of a nefarious man he owed money to, and that she needed to work it off. And she knew that meant predation and bad things. And so she paid it
Mm.
off and said, I've restored my self respect. They paid for school fees and books, and they were credit worthy and had status. And it was the remarkable stories of what the program did. So I can tell you more about the mechanism, but I think you'll be interested to know that 11,000 new bank accounts or renewed bank accounts were opened as a result, because having your own bank account in your own name, just you, is a requirement of the program.
And now, a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. Oh, wow. Well, this is a great response as well to the UN Women's stat that 158 million more women could be pushed into poverty by 2050 as a result of climate change. And this is just such a wonderful, direct answer to that problem.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're seeking to scale it next year for many more members and some experimentation with some other more supportive bells and whistles on the program. So yes, it's insurance, and yes, it's a social support, but it's also other things. We've got physical interventions and protections like cooling
Mm.
centers and shade and solar lights for working at night, and more things that help you get through the heat and help protect you, but also your income.
So, with these kind of multi factor solutions, I imagine partnerships are really important to the success of your work. I wonder if you can share a little bit about that side. Like, what do successful partnerships look like and result in?
Well, when you are delivering to communities that communities want to hear and trust information from groups and networks they know. And
Mm.
so we have found that partners who are deeply rooted in the community and know the community really well, um, it's a number one quality in a partner as we see scaling adaptation solutions for extreme heat. And that means organizations like the Self-Employed Women's Association. There's an organization called the Mahila Housing Trust. There's an organization called BRAC. I'm sure you're very, very familiar with BRAC. And we also work in Africa, in West Africa and Sierra Leone, and thinking about, we work with the women who are organized and self-governed in informal markets. And so shade structures over the markets, and solar fans and cold storage and that sort of thing. So some physical pieces, and then also some income supports. So the partnerships are, in our book, people in the community, trusted by the community, is the best way to go. And then, like any other partnership, trust is just so important. The urgency of this work cannot be overstated.
Mm.
While we have this solution that did help 50,000 women, 6 members of the Self-Employed Women's Association lost their lives to heat in that heat wave I
Mm.
mentioned at the end of May. And so that people are dying, it is urgent. And so how do you quickly form partnerships that can perform? And these are tough things to do. I mean, what we found is that the systems around these efforts are not really fit for purpose. You know, heat is a humanitarian crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a health crisis, it's a climate crisis. And I mean, that's a lot of crises. I know we said this was going to be positive, so I'm coming back
We'll
to that.
get there. We'll get there.
But the point is, we've got so much education to do at the same time as
Mm.
delivering, you know, uh, on the ground with these interventions and testing them, evaluating them, improving them, and doing it again in time for the heat season,
Yeah.
and the policies that are necessary to create the enabling environment for these things to grow and become mainstreamed. And so, um, partners are everything, and trust is everything.
So let's talk about financial sector partners for a second. You mentioned insurance, you mentioned credit, and you yourself have worked for a private sector bank. Um, what is the business case here? Like, is there a business case, or are you just going into meetings and saying, "People are dying, we need to do something?" Like, this is something I struggle with all the time to make sure solutions are sustainable.
Yes. So this is the number one question. I think after the performance of this product for SEVA members, um, there is, and I should have said the members paid into the program. So in the end, on balance, it was about a third of the premium was paid by SEVA members. So it's subsidized, but it's not fully subsidized.
Mhm.
And then when you see value, and this is part of the work, is to make sure, is this valuable to you? Yes, insurance is not intended to pay out every time, but what are the other pieces of value that help you manage your own heat risk and health better? And what tools do you need? And so we don't have enough time in your 30-minute podcast to talk about all the ways, but the innovations among the members are remarkable.
Mm,
But is it sustainable? I think that's a hanging question. I mean, is our financial system that has unpriced externalities in it, like emissions, is that sustainable? I mean, I'm not
mm,
I'm not trying to be tricky. I'm just saying um, the the idea that this product stands alone, it definitely can. Does it stand alone in people in the depths of poverty? Is that a business case? And I think the answer is yet to be arrived upon. That
mm.
doesn't, you know what I mean? I don't think we have the answer to that yet. And this is just the second year of this product. And so, is this product different from a flood product, or is this flood different from from a fire product? And this is about human health. And so these are interconnected pieces. There's even a food security piece in here. And so where is the economic benefit that comes from women being climate resilient? And are those streams of economic success, can you monetize them such that the private market wants to be a part of it? Or is this a demonstration of a way that we could think about supporting income, and it has other applications in other settings? And I think time is going to answer that for us.
Yeah, and it sounds like we might be at a bit of a disequilibrium moment where we're innovating and we're thinking about solutions, and the solutions of tomorrow, where there might be a really strong business case, are ones that we're working towards. I mean, you mentioned having worked in Florida, and considering all of the insurance challenges there, insurers moving out of Florida in the US and just refusing to
Yeah.
offer insurance to people. And like that's another space where there just has to be a lot of innovation crowded in to address those challenges. And it might require government and private sector and social sector to come together to address issues in the interim.
I think that's the answer. And also, um, it's not just innovation, it's public policy that has actuarially sound pricing.
Mm,
When politics leans into the price of risk, that's when things go sideways. And
mm,
that's what you saw and see in Florida. And I can't speak, I know Florida better than California, but you seeing
mhm,
those insurance actors exiting that market. And so if if it's cheap to live in a high risk place, humans love dynamic views. We want to be on the beach and the mountains by the lakes, and that's the humans love that. And so what do we need to pay to be there if it is that high risk? And so, and then that gives you, I mean, we're out of the informal labor market conversation, but can you get a mortgage on something you can't get insurance on? And so there's a relationship between, banking and insurance for, and an understanding of what that risk is, and then putting a real price on it. So
mhm,
um, you're right, and to take it back to think about the relationship of risk to price in the US. And then it will be the same because the private market is looking for return. So,
mm,
is there return in a product like this? And the answer is yes in lots of other places. We've talked to digital insurers in Nepal who are selling short-term policies through the telephone. I mean, through the
huh,
iPhone. And it's
huh,
not really an insurance company. I mean, it's behind it is an insurance company, but it's also um, it's it's like, AT&T would be selling you a heat policy for hospital coverage for 3 weeks during the hottest
mm.
season. that's a thing, and it pays out in, a couple of hours. There's a lot of innovation. You're right about that.
That's fantastic. Well, that's a good moment to pivot to solutions. I mean, often we come out of conversations like this with a sense of doom, and I promised our listeners we wouldn't do that this time. So, what actions can our listeners, particularly those in the financial services space, take to support women who are experiencing extreme heat?
Well, I would look at your company's involvement in um, you could look at the philanthropy, you could look at the impact investment space, you could look um, at the way that there's a relationship between the two. And we have worked with financial institutions and insurance companies that are using philanthropy, but also using expertise to help build solutions that fit. So it may be that you're lending expertise to build the solution and some of the philanthropy, and then comes from the corporate philanthropy. The other thing is at a more macro level is to think about extreme heat as it affects your part of the financial services sectors,
Mm,
industry.
mm,
What have you thought through extreme heat and infrastructure, or extreme heat and business interruption if you're in insurance, or extreme heat and health and workforce issues and management, or supply chain? There are heat is ubiquitous. It is everywhere, and places least ready for it are um, need to pay the closest attention because they haven't had time to experience it, to adapt to it, and it
mm.
can be quite a shock. And there are places, I mean, I'm thinking Sweden and Norway, where extreme heat is coming, and yet it is not a part of their the way that they do business. And so um, I know that's out of our geographic focus for today, but people in financial services should look at heat risk for their sector. But I would also look at, where is there an opportunity with your impact investment dollars to
Mm.
experiment in and advance this field of understanding how finance and risk products can help protect lives and livelihoods from extreme heat.
Kathy, I could talk to you for another hour, but unfortunately, our time is coming to a close, and I want to respect your time as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to chat with you today.
I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much. And to Women's World Banking, you're doing really important work. Thank you.
Thanks. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kathy. I have some fantastic notes, direct quotes actually. Women are the answer to the climate question. Kathy told us that. I love that. She also mentioned women are 4 times more heat intolerant than men are. That was something I didn't know before this conversation. And this is the one I want to end on. When women are climate resilient, we will all be climate resilient. That's tremendously important to keep in mind. And also there's a lot of hope in that statement. Now, as we move into probably a lot of media attention on climate during Climate Week and coming kind of at the end of the UN General Assembly, we cannot let the climate crisis erase the development strides that our global community has made. And that's what folks are coming together next week to talk about. So, as key decision makers approach these crucial discussions, during key moments like Climate Week and COP29, I'd like to urge all of our listeners, those who are in New York and those especially those who are outside of New York, to pay attention to all of the data that's coming out. And Women's World Banking on our social channels, we're going to be sharing new research, new data, and stories about real women's experiences. Economic modeling shows, as I mentioned, that by 2050, under the worst case scenario, climate change will push 158 million more women and girls into poverty. This is like reversing so much progress that we've made, but financial inclusion can help prevent much of this. So please stay informed and stay engaged in the conversation because there are things that you can do exactly where you are. If you found today's discussion valuable, please don't forget to subscribe, to rate us, to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We're still relatively new, and so those reviews mean a lot to us. This helps us also bring you content that resonates with you. So please stay engaged, stay informed, and we look forward to connecting with you in our next episode on October 17th.